I want you to cast your mind back in time to a point in your life where all you wanted was exactly what you have right now. Remember how that felt? Remember how you swore that if you got that thing or achieved that thing, you would be happy? So why aren't you? In this video, I'm going to be answering that question as well as giving you everything you need to know in order to permanently increase your happiness using the most recent and breaking studies. And there's going to be some of you that have the urge to click off of this video. It's not super hypey or stimulating. And if that's you, then you are exactly the type of person who needs to watch this video all the way to the end. This video gives you everything you need to know, and I seriously believe that it can completely change your life. So I am directly challenging you to put this video in full screen, put away all distractions, and just listen to what I have to say for the next 15 or 20 minutes. And if what I tell you doesn't completely change your life, then you can forget you ever saw me and go back to doing whatever it was you were doing before. No hard feelings. And with that being said, I'd like to introduce you to the concept called Hedonic Adaption that will completely change everything you thought you knew about happiness. You see, a study conducted in the state of Illinois in the 1970s discovered something really interesting. The researchers monitored the happiness levels of two different groups of people going through two different types of life-altering events. One group of people were lottery winners, the other group of people who randomly suffered a tragic accident that paralyzed them from the waist down. Obviously, the day after the events, the respective groups' happiness levels couldn't have been further apart. One group was sky high while the other group was falling into a deep depression. But as time went on, and specifically a year after these life-altering events occurred, something really fascinating started to happen with the two groups' happiness levels. But before I tell you how their happiness levels compared after a year, let me first just explain what hedonic adaptation actually means. Hedonic means pleasurable/unpleasurable sensations, or I guess you can just call it happiness. And adaptation means changing to suit the environment. You see, our brains are always working overtime in order to keep our hedonic levels balanced. If we start to get surges of the feel-good chemicals like oxytocin or serotonin, our brain will notice this and then slow down the production of those chemicals until they return back to normal. Likewise, if we become depleted of those feel-good chemicals, our brain will notice this as well and increase the production of those chemicals until we return back to normal. In a weird way, limiting our happiness actually increases our happiness. Because although we can never be feeling amazing permanently, we also can't be feeling depressed permanently either. And this explains the fascinating results of what happened to the happiness levels of crippled people and the lottery winners after a year. They both returned to exactly the same level of happiness a year after the event took place. Now, the lottery winners were ever so slightly happier than the people who became crippled, but the difference is almost completely negligible. And in fact, the people who became crippled reported finding more pleasure in standard day-to-day activities than the lottery winners. Which goes to show, it almost doesn't matter what circumstance you find yourself in. Our brain is always going to balance out the chemicals again until we return to our default normal state. So if you're generally a happy person, it doesn't matter if you're playing VR every day or reading a book every day, you're going to work out at about the same level of happiness either way. And this is why people with depression can't just follow your typical self-help advice and become better. Because there's an actual chemical imbalance in their brain. To a certain extent, it doesn't matter what they do, their happiness levels can't be restored because their default happiness is already so low purely because of their genetics. So am I saying you shouldn't even bother trying to do anything because eventually you're going to just return to your default state? No. You see, there are certain activities that can actually increase our default level of happiness, not just our happiness in the present moment. Many researchers have conducted experiments to discover just how much of our default happiness is actually under our control. Researcher Sonja Lyubomirsky has examined this hedonic set point and come up with a specific percentage. 40%. Her research determined that a full 50% of our default happiness is due to our genetics, 10% is due to situations such as where we were born and who our parents are, leaving roughly 40% up to our control. Other researchers have come up with slightly different numbers, but they've all been roughly in this ballpark. So the question becomes, how can we permanently increase the 40% of our default happiness that is actually under our control? Well, according to this research paper, most things that we are told to care about as a society are subject to hedonic adaptation. Fatty and unhealthy foods, movies, TV shows, partying, alcohol, drugs, money, status. Whether we get them or not, sure, they can temporarily make us happier, but our default happiness is almost completely unaffected, and that's the only thing that matters if you're looking to improve your long-term happiness. In a lot of cases, once once your hedonic levels adapt, you need to keep doing that activity just in order to feel normal. It can happen with video games, but it's relatively rare. It's much more common with alcohol, drugs, and the one most of us have fallen victim for, social media approval. Our brains are wired to enjoy getting approval from others. The more approval we get, the more likely we are to survive and pass on our genes. But social media has put this need for approval on steroids. We were never designed to get approval from hundreds, thousands, or even millions of people at once.
They love me.
The temporary high we get when we receive that much approval is insane. But this is the thing. Because of hedonic adaptation, we get used to the feeling of getting approved by that many people. The more posts we make that get hundreds of likes, the more matches we get on Tinder, the more streaks we have on Snapchat, and the more viral our TikToks go, the more our brains needs these things just in order to feel normal. And the reason you're not happy is because the majority of your time is going towards these hedonic adaptation activities. Activities that create the illusion of making you feel happier, but over enough time will not actually do anything to your default happiness. And if anything, mean that you get less joy out of doing normal day-to-day activities. People who spend all day scrolling TikTok will not get as much pleasure from going on a simple walk or enjoying a simple cup of tea as someone who's never been on social media. There are only a very select few activities that can actually impact the 40% of our default happiness that is actually under our control. These activities are what researchers call gratifications. They are activities that get us into a feeling of flow, where we stop noticing time go by and get into a state of energized focus. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, author of the book Flow, discovered this years ago. Through his own research, he found that the happiest people in the world were the people who spent the most amount of time in this flow state. To get into this feeling, you need two things. You need to be acting on an activity that is meaningful to you. Not meaningful according to other people's definition, but actually meaningful to you personally. And it also needs to be the perfect level of difficulty, wherein it's not too easy where you get bored, and it's not too difficult where you get discouraged. Activities like this seem to be practically immune to the effects of hedonic adaptation. And if anything, research has found that the more we do these activities, the more pleasure we get out of them. So how can we apply this in the real world? The best way to apply this is to make your passion your job. And if you don't know what your passion is, just follow your curiosity, experiment with things, and I promise you will find it. But what about money? If I try and make my passion my job, I might go homeless, and then my default happiness will go crashing and burning, right? Well, money can impact your default happiness to an extent, but not in the way that you actually think. Most people think the more money they have, the happier they'll be. But this isn't true. Whatever amount of money you have, your hedonic levels or your happiness levels will just adapt over time. However, you do need a certain amount of money in order to live. And if you can earn money in a way that allows you to meet your minimum living requirements and therefore spend the majority of your time working on something that gets you into flow state, then money can buy happiness. So instead of thinking of how you can become super rich or successful by following a certain career, think of how you can reduce your expenses so that the money you make from following your passion can afford to keep you living. And it's not even as if you have to have some kind of big success with following your passion either. Yes, it's important that you see constant progress in yourself, but accomplishments tend to be subject to hedonic adaptation unless there's something very meaningful to you personally. And now another major thing that can impact your default happiness. A Harvard study, which was actually the longest study ever conducted in happiness, they spent over 75 years doing this one, found that good relationships make us happier and healthier, period. And it's not about quantity of relationships. If everyone likes you, then you're being fake. You're playing a character in front of them just so that they'll like you more. That's not real. You need to be the genuine and authentic you when speaking to people. When you do this, you might lose some of the current friends you have, and overall you might have less friends than you currently have, but the friendships and relationships that you do make will be so much more meaningful and actually increase your default happiness. These relationships can really be found anywhere, but I found it's easiest to find them whenever you just follow your passion, because whenever you do this, you'll naturally find yourself surrounded with people who have similar interests to you. And this goes for both platonic and romantic relationships, by the way. And of course, to maximize your default happiness, you also have to be in good, healthy physical condition. So make sure you're eating right, sleeping right, and exercising. When I say exercise, I really don't mean what most people mean whenever they say that. I made a whole video on why typical health and fitness is bad, and you can click here to watch it, or I'll leave the link in the description as well. But the general idea is that most people who are lifting weights or doing cardio are doing it because they hate their body, not because they love their body. Plus, most people who do those activities don't enjoy the activities themselves, which means they eventually procrastinate on them. To be consistent and to maximize your happiness, you need to first accept your body for what it is right now and love it regardless of looks. Then find a sport that you enjoy, find healthy foods that you enjoy, and just stick with those. The final and most important factor for increasing your default happiness is mindset. Someone who has a crippling fear of failure will have a much lower default happiness level than someone who just doesn't even care if he wins or loses and is just too busy having fun in the moment. The more you look at life from a positive perspective, by living in the moment and only focusing on things within your control, the happier you will be. Studies show that showing gratitude daily alone can increase your default happiness by a whopping 22%. That is insane. There's a lot that can be said on mindset, but there's a Stoic quote by Marcus Aurelius that I think summarizes this very well. It's time you realize that you have something in you more powerful and miraculous than the things that affect you and make you dance like a puppet. If you want to learn how to do a digital detox effectively, then click on the video on screen right now. Or if you want to learn a little bit more about my philosophy on exercising, click the other video on screen right now. I hope you have an amazing day, and I'll see you again soon.